Hello folks. One of the nice things about having a video channel like this is that you get people writing in and saying, oh, by the way, could you just comment on this? And one thing that came up, or has come up actually several times now, is the use of language. How do you use language to make the stories sound and feel authentic? I don't know. Well, the simple fact is that language is incredibly difficult. I had someone write to me many years ago, a delightful lady in Canada, who said, oh, I was reading your book and I enjoyed it all the way through until on page 148 you used the word posse. She said that was awful because that pulled me up to the 20th century immediately and it ruined the rest of the story for me. And I had to write back and said, well, very sorry you didn't like that word, but posse, you may not realise, comes from the Statutes of Winchester 1285. It's a very old legal term for raising the posse of the county to go and chase down any malefactor, any felon. It's authentic. I've had people in the UK who complain when I use terms like garbage or trash because they say, why are you using modern Americanisms in a nice old medieval book? Well, mainly because Americans still use medieval terms. Garbage and trash are both medieval terms, and the fact that we've stopped using them in England really isn't any reason why I should stop using them. But in the same vein, you have to sort of think, well, where do you draw the line? I've got a real difficulty because, for example, if I was to buy, as I have in the past, a book by Dostoevsky, I would expect someone to have translated that because I don't speak Russian. Now, if you pick up most books on medieval English, any of Chaucer's works as an example, you expect it to be translated to an extent. Maybe not a huge extent, but you need to have some of the simple things ironed out. I've the basic view that if you're going to be authentic, then most of the writing will have to be in medieval English, Saxon, Norman French, with a certain amount of Celtic, if you're talking about Exeter. Not many people are going to be able to read that. If you're going to be really authentic, of course, then you can't just write it like that. You've got to write it with a quill or a reed, because they didn't have these things in those days. And if you're going to be absolutely authentic, you'll write each book once on parchment and only one person will be able to buy each copy. Now, that may be very authentic, but it wouldn't allow me to pay my mortgage. So, authenticity, you've got to know where to draw the line somehow. I find that writing with modern language but using fairly careful grammar and occasional medieval words is adequate. Some people think I write in much too modern language. Some of my conversational pieces, for example, some of the dialogue is perhaps too modern colloquial for some people. But it's really difficult because medieval people would have used colloquial language for their time. Now, how do you translate what would have been colloquial in those days for these days? We don't know what it would have been like. You can go to Piers Plowman, you can go to Chaucer, you can read some Boccaccio, but it's actually quite difficult to figure out how they would have spoken, what sort of language they used. With my latest books, including Fields of Glory, for example, this one, I use quite a lot of nicknames for almost all the people involved in the Vintane, in the platoon. And the reason for that is quite simply that I think they would have had nicknames for each other because a lot of them would have been going to battle because they were trying to avoid something at home. They would have wanted to leave their name at home. Some of them might have been felons who had been convicted outlaws, convicted of murder or various other crimes. They would want to leave their details behind. They wouldn't want to take them with them. But also, if you look at almost any grouping of late teenage, early 20s young men, they will usually have nicknames of some sort for each other. So it seems to me fair enough. But when you're using language, and apart from the obvious things like, for example, when you have archers sending arrows off from their bows, they wouldn't have said shooting arrows, because shooting was a much more recent term that came around because of guns. You wouldn't have them firing arrows. Again, firing involves gunpowder, that's a more recent thing. They would almost invariably have been loosing their arrows. But is that something that the average reader is really going to be bothered about? I don't know. I think it's basically the use of language has to come down to the judgment of the author and the editor together. The editor must have a good amount of involvement, because it's one of those things where the editor has more experience generally with that market than the author normally will. So there you go. Language, there are no easy options. It's basically a case of you need to try it out and see what works best. And having said that, I hope this was some use. I've given some ideas, probably not that many. But it is one of those things where you have to suck it and you see what works for you as an author. So I hope that's some help. If you enjoyed this, do please comment on it and give me any questions you've got. I'll be delighted to answer them. If you like it, hit the like button. If you really enjoyed it, share it, and please subscribe to the feed and tell your friends to as well. And hopefully I will then see you with the next video. Take care.